Good evening, or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. The title of tonight's Dharma talk is, I think it's Examine Your Mind. Is that what I said? You sneezed right in the middle of that. Yeah, examine, look at, observe, see your mind. I also say train your mind. Training the mind is, you can describe lots of different ways. It's done lots of different ways. Fundamental understanding from this person is, having done a few different kinds of meditation, is sit still, watch what's moving in the mind, watch what's moving down the hallway or in the room next to you or in the treetops. Just observe, be an observer. Observe, as I sometimes use the metaphor of the clouds. Just, the clouds are very interesting, but basically none of your business. You have no say-so about clouds. If you take that attitude towards the mind stream, towards the formations that come up in the mind, you are beginning to examine. If you can look at the thoughts as if, you can't really fundamentally depersonalize them because they won't put up with that. They'll fight back and seem even more real. But you can just observe the texture, the quality. You just can examine. It's a kind of like the science, but it's not exactly like science in that we're not looking for results. Science is looking for results, and anytime science is looking for results, it totally misses what's right in front of it for a result about it. It doesn't see what it fundamentally is. This is why it takes human beings so long to get anywhere. You look at the world today, it's pretty chaotic. It does not look good. It does not, what is it saying? It does not bode well for to have this many crazy people. That's always been that way since beginning of this time. But now some of them are actually in charge of the world and in charge of the weather. But you, regardless of what the rest of the world does, dependent origination, the momentum of insanity has been going on forever. Probably will continue unless the world comes to an end, which it could, the way things are looking. I'm not laughing because it's funny. It's just that it's amazing that people will do something that's totally against their own best interest because they want control. They want control. The illusion of control, they'll settle for that. But you, if you're listening to this old man, you could actually just begin to get to know yourself. This is not easy. It's not a walk in the park, as they say. It's not easy. And for each person, it's going to be very, very unique and individual, and will not be like anyone else's path, even though in our situation, everyone's sitting here, everyone's doing a similar kind of meditation, more than likely. It seems to be necessary to have someone that you can talk to, a guide, a mentor, in the Tibetan tradition, Indian tradition, a guru, or a teacher. That's all that means, is teacher, even though there are a lot of romantic ideas about it. Teacher. Lao Shi, as it would be said in Chinese, Lao Shi. Sifu is also a way of saying that, teacher. Or Shifu. So the teaching person has, if they're teaching out of what they see, out of what they have understood or discovered, is not teaching out of a group of ideas or concepts, but they're also not ignoring that, because something like, say, the 30 verses, Vasubandhu's 30 verses, uses concepts, even though I don't read it in Sanskrit, as Chisho does, who leads our our class on the 30 verses. Still, it's the translations. If you look at the translations, the same, that if this translation is a good translation, that same kind of information about the nature of relative truth, the nature of ultimate truth, comes through there. It takes a while to understand that with concepts. And even then, once you understand it with concepts, you still have to see it beyond, past, on through, on the other side of the concepts, which gives you no relative support. There is no support there. The whole idea of support actually engenders or generates a belief in something else that can help you. The whole idea of the teacher is, as Trungpa Rinpoche said, and I think it's in Myth of Freedom, the reason you have a teacher is so you can leave the teacher. It's not so you can be stuck with a teacher the rest of your life. You may need to leave the teacher, but it's not a good idea to leave the teacher until you see that your mind and the mind of the teacher are no longer separate things. That's a realization. It's not a thought pattern. It's not a conclusion. It's not an exclusion. It's none of those illusions. You actually see it. You actually see this. Smell, taste, touch, hear, think. You actually, it's not even an experience, because if it is an experience, it will start to fade or disappear. There's an experiential aspect to it, but that's just grass along the highway. It's not the highway. You may have emotional considerations or ideas. They may show up around your path, your mind training, your examination of your mind. The idea with examining here, and of course the relative structure, the relative talking about this has all kinds of handicaps. You can't actually say what it is. So we say examine the mind. So you sit down and, so what is the mind? What is it I'm even examining? That might take a while. And so that's why the simple, radical, minimalist instruction is just observe. Sit down, hold still, sit in a symmetrical posture and sit very still without being rigid. This is the way I talk about this or teach this. The body and the mind are not two separate things. They're also not the same thing. That starts to get well, that's it. How's that going to help? Reflecting on that. So that's the third thing that we've added on. How is that going to help? Because the ego mind, the self-centered mind, wants some kind of a structural situation that is comprehensible from a relative perspective of getting somewhere, accomplishing something, building something, gaining idea of something. So in each person's mind stream, your mind stream, my mind stream, any person's mind stream, if you sit down, the idea of symmetry is you can't go into the mind stream and make that into some kind of symmetrical situation. Although there are practices in the tantric tradition that are about the symmetry of visualization and about it's referred to as deity yoga or creation completion practices. And I've done some of those. I haven't done all of them, of course, but I've done some. I think those are valuable, but perhaps that is what you need to do. If you do, then you'll know it. You'll know that. And that's something that I may be able to help you with, and I may not. You may need to go to Dalai Lama or His Holiness Karmapa or one of the monks in those different lineages, the Gelug or the Nyingma, etc. Karmakagyu, Sakya. But since you're listening to this person, you could listen. You could sit down, hold still, sit symmetrical, so that the body and mind situation, the dissimilarity between asymmetry of the mind and the symmetry of the body starts to show up as a contrast. This takes time. This takes time in the sense of you have to practice this a lot. That's why it's called a practice, not some kind of success story. So examine emotions. You're sitting and emotions come up in the mind, or thoughts about this, passion, aggression, ignorance, or any of the different energies that show up as confusion. Let's just start with that. What do you do with that? Just observe that. And the observing of that can show up as the emotional radiance of that difficulty. That difficulty has a dynamic to it that is conceptual, intellectual, and that it also has a dynamic that is all the smoke that's being blown around by the sparks of the fundamental disturbance. We'll call that emotions. It's just a way of using images to help see that thoughts and emotions have a different kind of energy, a different kind of speed, a different kind of development, but are fundamentally not separate. They just look like it. So the idea of examining is what to use the metaphor of a medical examiner or someone for doing some kind of forensics, or looking into or studying history, or studying anything that you're studying that has a relative appearance. Just to look at what that is rather than conclude, because of the grasping, the need for some kind of relative knowledge about it to come to conclusions. What's the word? Prematurely. So don't conclude. Just watch. Just look at that forest or that underbrush that is your mind, that gets very dark, and we want to turn away from that and go eat some cheesecake. Well, at least that's what I did today. How many did I have? Not very many.
Where's your now?
You don't know? You weren't counting? So there's nothing wrong with that, nothing wrong with doing anything. It's just that when we do that, it tips away from the investigation into something that is it's like a filler. It fills in that area where we were investigating with some kind of pleasure or conclusion, or maybe more disturbance, maybe more churning around in thought patterns around a particular problem that we're having in relationship, or the job, or our community, or So over time, through practicing, returning to the cushion, returning to the wall, returning to the teacher, the teaching, and the community, or the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, that by using that structure over time, it helps us, it helps us to see more clearly into that darkness that is our mind, those dark areas. And just like, to continue the metaphor further, just like looking into a dark area, you don't see anything but darkness. That's why you need to keep looking at it, and then watch what shows up in front of it to try to seduce you away from going in there. Seduce you. Oh, let's stay back here and just calculate, figure out this. Why we're doing this way? Why questions are circular? Why? Because. You want to ask a question? You've heard me say this before. I've been saying this for probably 10, 15 years. The what question is important. And so what is this? Looking in that dark space, instead of saying why, that takes us right out of it into a bunch of conceptual thoughts or responses or digressions. Whereas if you look at the darkness and say, what is that? Or just what? What is that? You can also say, the other W word is who. Who is this? Get into the fundamental area where there's mistaken identity. And what is the mistaken identity? It's belief in a self, someone, some person, and belief in an other, some friend, some enemy, some neutral, some situation. You're here, the wall is over there. All those polarities tend to draw us out of the fundamental examination of the mind into maybe even high levels of relative truth. Could be even Buddhist teachings in some areas. You can start rotating in a particular teaching and not see what it's pointing at, because you get so much satisfaction out of intellectually understanding it. being able to explain it to others. If you see what this is, you may not be able to explain anything. This what you are. If you realize what this is, it is ineffable. You can't explain it. The only way you can teach it is to somehow point a person, a student, in the direction that they need to look. And with this person, I encourage you, anyone, is to look at your mind. And one of the ways you can do that is to sit down, have all the senses open, hold very still, so the contrast between what is moving and what is still is strong. So you get the idea of seeing contrast. The contrast could be very subtle, the difference between cobalt blue and cerulean blue. Still blue, but a little bit different. The contrast between one particular frequency and another could be very slight. But seeing that contrast is necessary without concluding that one is the right one and the other is the wrong one. They're just colors, they're just frequencies. Even that conclusion, they're just colors, they're just frequencies, is too much. But you might have to do that for a while before you realize that any projection, any conclusion on anything prevents you seeing the deep, fundamental, and vast and profound nature of the mind. When I say the mind, it's mind belongs to no one. Thought process that you think are your thoughts. You think you're thinking your thoughts, you're not thinking your thoughts. Your thoughts are being what? Thunk? Thoughts are, the personality is extra. The idea that I do this gets its stability from the environment and from the community, from the culture, from everyone that is around us that we interact with, that gives us a feeling of separation. We're the one who's saying this. They're the one who's hearing what is being said. They're the one who's responding. It's quite a stage set. And sometimes I say, and I'll say it now because I think it's helpful, is get off the stage. Don't leave the theater, but get off the stage, sit in the front row if you can. And you'll notice that if you kind of using that as a metaphor, as a kind of objectivity, not that that's all that objective, but it's a little bit more than being on the stage and being the victim, or being on the stage and being the perpetrator, or being on the stage and being the peacemaker, on and on and on. All the world's a stage, as was told to us by, what's that guy's name? Something was shaking, I know that. So it seems to come out out of the awareness of whatever is moving. That's the area. What is moving won't tell you so much as what will begin to show up in your mind stream as a deeper understanding will be what happens when you train your mind to watch movement without adding or joining it, watch movement without subtracting or judging it or fighting it, and watch movement without ignoring it or shutting down or turning away from it. Just watch the movement come and go, rise and fall, arise and fall. And in some area, it's not really a point, but in some area, one begins to notice that there is an observer quality happening that is not exactly a person, not exactly personhood, not exactly a self, something like that. And if you try to grasp that as, oh, I think I'm transcending my personal self, you'll begin to rotate in a much more, in a wider circle that looks like you're getting somewhere. If you look like you're getting somewhere, probably need to talk to your teacher if you have one. So examine the mind, examine your mind, find some time, sit down. If you're in the monastery, you're already committed to this, even if you're only here for a couple more days. You made a commitment to do this, do it. Don't live the rest of your life without some kind of strong, intentional training to see what is true of yourself. The Buddha Dharma is not the only path. I'm sure there are lots of paths. Probably when we murdered millions of indigenous people, we probably destroyed some amazing spiritual paths that showed that probably were showing up in the Americas. Who knows? So train the mind, get to the cushion, use whatever forms help you get to the cushion and stabilize. If you have some understanding of what the necessity is, or see we call it necessity of having a teacher, have someone. If you're going to cross the river, you're going to need a guide. You're going to go up the mountain, probably going to need a guide to some extent, or at least someone to tell you which way is up. That's not always apparent. When ego's in charge, ego's in control, it's not good. Not good for the ongoing singularity and perpetration of one's own suffering and the suffering of those around you. So train your mind and examine what we call the mind. Examine what arises in the mind without grasping, rejecting, or shutting down the three poisons. That can be very, very difficult. Not only can be, it's going to be. It will be. As I say, I don't know how else to say this other than do it anyway. There can't be a guarantee because it's not the mundane path. There's no guarantee. There's only an intention. So I could say more, but I'm also happy to respond to questions if there are some.
Jake Bowing.
Go ahead, Jake.
To me, it seems that examine is a little more active than observing. For some reason, it comes to me as examining with the intent of understanding.
Yeah.
How do you examine to understand without reaching conclusion or labeling? Bowing.
Okay, the intention to see what is there is not an intention to see what you already think or conclude or project or speculate that is there based on what the ego mind is churning up. So just observe is the way we begin. Shikantaza, sit down, hold still, watch, observe what occurs. Just observe, just receive whatever's happening. And examination will begin to come out of that. Something will come up in the mind stream. You don't push it away. You observe it, and if it keeps hanging around some thought forms tend to loiter around that area of the consciousness where we just can't stop thinking or having anxiety about a particular thing. It keeps arising and rising. If that's happening, the observing quality is going to work for a little while where you can actually observe, but eventually it just gets painful. And so we want to get away from it. Rather than get up, then you could actually begin to examine that. It's not exactly contemplation because contemplation usually has something you're contemplating on. And this situation would be contemplating just a spontaneous contemplation of the texture or the feeling or the quality of whatever it is that's creating the disturbance. So just observe. You're sitting and you're just observing the thoughts come and go. But if you get into areas where things get abrasive or smelly or start to produce anxiety while you're on the cushion, then you could examine that. You could actually use that as what is called a dharma gate, or an opening into truth, or something that's blocking the truth. The gate, it's a gate. So look at that gate and see if that gate won't open or give a little bit, so you can go deeper into that, whatever that negativity is that is dependently arisen, that looks so damn personal. Like I'm having these feelings, even if somebody causes or says something to you that is rude, impolite, or disrespectful, the emotion that comes up in your mind stream, they did not dump that into you. That's your mind stream. So what is triggered there is showing you that aspect of the mind stream that has been unexamined. The only way you know about it is when somebody comes along and does something that triggers that bundle of emotions or fear or distress that starts tumbling out of your eighth consciousness or deeper levels of your consciousness. And so they didn't cause it, but of course you didn't cause it either. It was just there, it's just unexamined. So that's what I'm saying by examine the mind. And that's very situational. One cannot, we're not saying that you could sit down and just deliberately start examining those things. Although there are some psychologies, there's dozens, hundreds of them these days that don't particularly talk about training the mind in the way it's talked about here. They go in and try to actually locate the issue and work with it with some kind of structure, which may be like psychoanalysis or all the other things that are showing up on what Wikipedia. I think it's gone from 70 different therapies up to 150 to 200 now. I mean, everything's a therapy. You know, you've heard of rabbit food therapy? No? Well, it hasn't been invented yet, but it will, because it's coming.
Jake Bowing. Certain feelings or emotions seem to be tricky and they avoid me when I'm on the cushion. Is there a way to observe them when I'm in post meditation or bring them back to the cushion, Bowing?
I wouldn't worry about bringing them back to the cushion. When you do shikantaza or just sitting, just keep that very simple, very direct, very radical, which means the root. You know, just the root, just the basis, insofar as you can understand it that way, or minimal, nothing added. I'm saying if something comes up in your mind stream, then you're not adding or subtracting anything. Something comes in and is gnawing at you. Sometimes it just, your whole meditation is just kind of being absconded with by some thing that's happening in your life that is just painful or difficult or threatening, or, and then you could actually look at the texture of that. You could begin to examine, rather than the story about it, which spins out into why, because, why is this happening to me? Why, I don't deserve this, all of those kinds of things. I'm not saying you're saying that, but quite often we abandon the actual specimen that we're of emotion, the situation that comes up. We abandon it for a bunch of thought patterns about it, because it doesn't have the concreteness of a actual forensic study, or some kind of study where you're looking at a physically existing thing, or you're looking at you being a pharmacist, something where you actually have some solid material there that you're working with, chemistry and all of that. So whereas in the mind stream, you have to do it very, very slowly, and see if you can see the texture of that which is arising. They'll say, we'll call it fear of something, fear of a particular thing, or just unnamed kind of fear. Go in and look at, go into that haunted house. So, and I don't say, if that's happening off the cushion, I don't say take that to the cushion. I would say necessarily, I would say just spend time in the cushion, and eventually that probably will arise there. Quite often those kinds of things that are submerged arise in solitary retreats, usually long ones. So do it there. Go ahead, Jake.
Thank you. Bye.
Any further questions?
Wonder, Bowing, you had mentioned before asymmetry of the mind. What are you talking about there, Bowing?
Just the disjointed feeling of thought patterns. It's kind of out of whack somehow. We don't know about this, we know about that, but this doesn't fit with that. Why is this happening? Something's happening over here. We just get caught up in the discursiveness of the mind, just jabber. So it's out of balance. The asymmetry. I think symmetry is just another word for symmetrical. Just it has a kind of balance to it. That's all I'm saying. Go ahead. Other questions? No questions, we can all go home.
When you're bowing, can you say more about texture? You speak about that a lot. How is texture different from content? Bowing.
So I'll continue to use metaphors. I don't know how else to do this. It's like the texture. If you listen to music, there's a texture to the music, quality to the sound. There's a texture to visual things. There's a texture to carpeting. There's a texture. If you look at a painting, there's a texture, not only the physical texture of the paint, but there's also a texture to the way that works with whatever image or lack of images is being worked with. So it's a quality that is fundamental to what is being produced rather than what is gathered as some kind of idea of what this is in terms of its name or its description. It's fundamental to it. It happens it's in food, it's in any kind of experience. There's even a texture to fragrances, and you might have to get a little bit poetic to be able to describe some of those, because they're differentiate between lilacs and what's that other the oil, I can't think of the name of the oil.
Lavender.
Yeah, not lavender oil. There's another oil that you've used.
Valor.
Valor is one of them. It's the name. Amazing texture. How do you can sense the texture, because fragrance is like, or odor is like texture. It's like you can't really describe. If no one has ever smelled cow manure, there's no way to describe that. At least I don't know how to describe it. But so there's some things that are so close to what they actually are in terms of texture. There's no words that can take us away into that. Whereas if you see something visually, you can have all kinds of descriptions. If you hear something, you can describe it in lots of different ways using the structure, the concepts around music or sound. But you can talk about a particular kind of music all day, and if you can't hear, or if you can't hear it, you might have some idea of what it's about, but the structure won't give you the texture, the concept, the ideas, the description won't give you. Like, you can read menus over and over again, but it will not give you the taste of the food, the texture of the food. And so I'm saying the same thing about emotions. When emotions come up that are challenging, difficult, threatening to you, or feel like you're being put upon by someone or something, not necessarily. There's not an otherness is not directly to blame. It's dependently risen, so there's some kind of activity there. But what seems to be necessary is to stay or enter into the quality, the fundamental quality of whatever it is that is arising, whether it's anger. It's difficult because the tendency is to want to just get angry or stop the anger, to add something else to it, or ignore the anger, ignorance, to go in and actually feel the anger fundamentally all the way through the floor. To feel that anger helps us understand the very nature of relative truth in regards to realizing our true nature, of how it's such a cover-up. More?
When you're bowing, I know you say don't maintain, but is there a way to stay more frequently in that area of texture bowing?
Probably not. It's an intent, just return to it. If something shows up, just go to the texture of it. You could even say to yourself, if you wanted more, how I'm looking at this, but how does this feel? It's the feeling quality of anger, rather than the anger that leaves the anger, abandons the anger, and goes into concepts about the anger. Simply put, why do I keep getting angry? Even saying what is anger might be too distant. It might have to happen without any particular conceptual idea. And it probably will not, the understanding won't deepen without repetition.
Don't you, Bowen?
Koji.
So if anger arises, the concept of anger arises, Is it kind of do we oscillate back and forth from the concept to the feeling itself? Since the concept just seems like it's gonna come no matter what, bowing.
So there, it seems like what is necessary, if I understand your question, is just repetition, just return to it.
Yeah, I told you bowing. So is the repeating then in those instances where we're having the experience?
Yeah, that's where you, rather than kind of try to create that and apply some kind of method to it. Now, there are other teachings that work with us differently, and if I would say, do that, whatever you want. I'm talking about being a person who got into this particular path because of intense anger and other emotions. Anger is not going away.
Augie bowing.
Augie,
Is there anything to do, if I get into a period where the mind is just throwing up fairly neutral chatter, jabbering on,
while you're sitting,
maybe while I'm sitting, as a way of perhaps not triggering emotions like anger or fear? Bowing?
well, it might be some other intent to your question, but I would say, don't do anything, just receive it, just observe it. And then if something does come up that has sharp edges around it, or is the quality of it, is the texture of it is abrasive or difficult, then you could go into you could look at the texture rather than leave the texture for who caused it, why it's happening, or here I go again, or any of those other, dozens and dozens of kinds of responses that show up that way. Or
Augie bowing, what if the chatter is just so, is easily discounted as that's just what it is, that's just what's coming up, and not dismissed, but just that's as it is, versus
what about it?
is there something to do if is something to suspect if
No,
that persists? Bowing.
no. If it shows up, just watch what happens, just observe, and it'll get stronger, it'll get weaker, and you won't mind what it does.
Well, Divine, can you give a description of your anger as an example of
I want my way. How about that?
texture?
Oh,
Can you describe the texture?
texture. I thought you wanted me to get mad. Texture of it?
How would you describe the texture of that?
Painful, interior, sucks up your energy in such a way that it goes into a cage, and it tightens right up, and it wants out in the form of expression, wants out in the form of something, some kind of rage or something. So what I just made a fool of myself there by doing is actual anger. It's that energy. There's no one who's angry. The anger is still there. It's a dependent there isn't. You can't, and you don't have to miss your life. You can actually be the person you were born to be. Most people fight with their life and try to be somebody else. More. I didn't even answer your question. Why is there more?
Well, Divine, I wanted a description of texture to understand what you're pointing at when you say
Points,
texture.
bumps, hot spots, pieces of iron rod shoved through your eye, texture, sitting on thumbtacks, 500 of them, all pointed up. The texture, it's difficult to describe it without using metaphors that are not that at all. It's just an intense anger that comes up that wants to get out in terms of expression, so that it can build a substrate of identity under the falseness of the ego. Ego uses anger to be the person who's angry. Anger is dependent. There isn't There's no self in the skandhas, and so there's no one who's angry. So rather than try to get rid of the anger, I say, go to the texture, look at the texture until eventually you will see that there was no one who was angry. So what you're doing, to speak it very literally, you're kind of depersonalizing those emotions by just going to the texture of it, depersonalize it. You can't fundamentally do it, and that's not the fundamental object. The fundamental understanding or object is to see the truth yourself, which is see there's no being who's having. But if you try to stop that, that reinforces the person who's having that emotion. That's why it's necessary to respect the confusion. Be the confusion you're trying to get rid of. I don't think you can do that just as an intellectual exercise. You have to do it with a lot of sitting meditation, a lot of awareness practice.
You say also though, to get into the front row, is that in any way leaving the texture if you're getting in the front row?
It could be. There may be times where you have to just murder somebody. So I'm saying there may be times where you can't be anything but the karma that's arising. But someone next to you is going to say, well, they don't have any self-control, or they've lost it, or they've, why aren't they more like me, somebody who's never murders anybody. I'm saying using murder, not as to validate that, but I'm saying doing something that's difficult or destructive or harmful to themselves or harmful to others. And we impute or we think that everybody should have control of themselves. And we don't have as much say-so as we think we do. Or the, 38% of the world thinks they have control. And they only realize they don't when the body mind passes back into the elements, and the only thing that's left, which was what was there in the first place, is the intermediate state. And the appearance of a singularity shows up, sometimes called a soul. We don't refer to that soul. We refer to it as Buddha nature. It may have a feeling of independence as an entity, and it may not. It doesn't matter. More? Any other questions?
Question from Chris Smith. Why am I about to walk into work and not sit and stare at a wall? Don't you know?
First of all, you don't stare at walls. It's not chikantaza. Staring at anything is just staring. Staring at something is an attitude of engendering an attitude of blankness before it's even time for that to occur, though it might. And why are you about to walk into work? Probably because you're lazy and don't want to train your mind. How's that, Chris? I have no idea. I don't know what your job situation is. I don't know how much you need money. I don't know how many people you're supporting. But your question it's like you're trying to trap me into something. Like I don't have any information about you. If I knew you, and I knew what was actually happening, I might say you're probably walking into work because that takes precedence over mind training. I wouldn't say staring at a wall. If you're looking at sitting meditation and staring at a wall, big misunderstanding. And one thing you really are probably going to need from the questions that have been accumulating over the last few weeks, few months, is a teacher, not me. Not me. Don't come this way at all. Go somewhere else. And if you do come this way, probably not going to be easy for you. More if you have it. Jessica
Vine, when you were talking about anger earlier, if there's nobody who is angry, is the anger still about anything?
Yes, it's a dependent arisen. So the anger was caused by this, triggered that, then this happened, then this got in the way, and then some kind of someone got enraged, and the someone that got enraged certainly got enraged, but they are not a solid being. That is also dependently arisen. The imagination that there's someone somewhere doing something, having success, having failure. That's another level of pratitya samuppada. There's no self in this concept, this form, feeling, perception, concept, and consciousness. It sure the hell looks like it though. And so even though you see that it's an illusion, see that it's unreal, it's still going to show up. I sometimes call it a clown on the roof, because it doesn't have a lot of say-so anymore, but it still can be up here. But the anger itself is dependently risen, that quality. And this goes on in very, very deeply into more and more rarefied or subtle forms of consciousness, and comes out the other direction into everything going from smoke into fire, into trees that are burning, into volcanoes. So it goes all those directions, all those different vibrations. Smoke is just as solid as the incense that it is abandoning. Just doesn't look like it. Sir?
Jeez, I'm bowing. Is there a contrast between examining our mind and what looks like other bowing?
Say more. What do you want to know?
Jeez, I'm bowing. When content shows up, are we looking at our mind? Bowing?
Yes. You are.
Jeez, I'm bowing. Can we do anything but examine our mind? Bowing?
Yeah, you can refuse to examine it. You spit on it. You can do something. You push, stop, don't, stop this, stop that. Don't do this, because the ego mind is also dependently risen, and part of the dependent origination comes out of fear, comes out of hope, comes out of all the other polarities that show up that are unreal, but still are operating everything. Go ahead.
Jeez, I'm bowing. If there isn't anyone, how does pushing and pulling arise? Where did it
Do you think there is somebody? Do you think there's something to do, something to accomplish? There isn't anything to do. Everything is already, from the point of ultimate truth, which is actually a point, everything is already perfect. There's nothing to correct, nothing to fix. So the path, that's why the path is a path of awareness rather than a path of accumulating ideas and concepts and so on. But you may have to do that for a while.
Jeez, I'm bowing. How is that confusion wisdom?
Not separate from it. Wisdom, what the Buddha saw was, as far as we know, was confusion. That was his awakening. He saw it, but he saw it in the entire situation. He didn't abandon confusion and become enlightened. The enlightenment that he saw was clarity about confusion. Therefore, they're not separate.
Jeez, I'm bowing. I keep having trouble with that concept. Like, I want to take confusion and make it into wisdom.
No, you don't have to, because it's not separate from it.
Do I just observe that tendency?
Yeah. What are you doing with it now?
I think I keep trying to look at confusion as if it's wisdom.
Okay, well then just keep doing that. It won't last. Nothing lasts. But things tend to persist if you struggle with them or fight with them or try to correct them or move them from this to that or adjust. They tend to persist because you imbue or give a kind of life to something that would run out of steam if you didn't fight with it, agree with it, or shut down on it, or have. How do I know? I don't know. I don't know anything. I knew something, I couldn't do this. What am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? Why are you all listening to me? Sent you.
Send you bowing. What is failure on this path?
I can speculate on what it is you're looking for, but I'd rather have you say more about it.
I was thinking of you saying at some point in time, I remember you saying, just let yourself fail.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, well, there are two questions.
Great.
So in that sense, what is failure? And
Let yourself fail.
and can you, when one is on this path, can one fail in practice?
So it's a little convoluted here to try to talk about it. The only way you can fail is to leave the path of the intention to see the truth, the intention to be with all things, the intention to save all beings, the intention to put others before yourself. However that shows up for each person individually. You don't have to be a doctor, a nurse, or something. You can do that from a mountaintop, or not. Maybe you can't. So that's the last part. And the first part of it is experience the failure. If you feel like you're not doing very well, then you're not understanding enough, then don't do too much with it. Just be a failure. But don't step off the path. Don't leave. You're a fully ordained monk, just continue. Continue to do what you do day after day. You practice, take care of Rumi, and you do whatever Chizan commands. Is that right? Oh, no, that's not right. But you can't really, when I say be a failure, that's just a way of helping you or anybody kind of see that that's just a commentary on what we think is happening or what we think we're not living up to. Quite a bit of that is ego language. And so we just fail. Like it's a kind of surrendering or kind of giving up. In Atisha's 7 points of mind training, I think I might have this off because I don't have a great memory. But if it's better for me to be sick, let me be sick. It's better for me to get well, let me get well. Better for me to die, let me die. I think I'm missing some of it there, but it's basically saying, let's just stop fighting with everything. Let's just be genuine in the midst of this crazy world of samsara. Not easy to do, especially if when something does come up where we made a mistake on something or we've miscalculated something. It can be a failure. Fail. It's just a word about something. Misunderstanding. Just like the people who are great successes take pride in doing things that, not that they haven't worked for that, but they also were born with a certain kind of intelligence to be able to even create millions of dollars or great success or become famous actors. Or you can't just decide to be a famous actor. I know I decided to be a famous artist, and I worked very hard at it, but found out that I couldn't do that. I was not born with a natural ability to create that. I do all right because I worked pretty hard at what I was doing, so I would do passable artwork, but I didn't want that. I wanted to be a genius. That did not occur. It's not even an occurrence anyway. So does that mean I was a failure? No, kind of. I was a failure at art. I'm a failure at astrology, a failure at handwriting analysis, and a failure at tarot card reading. Failure. I can go on and on and on, but it'll sound like I'm getting down on myself. No difference between success and failure. This is the 8 worldly dharmas. If you don't see it, then it's not a boxing match between right and wrong. You actually see they're not separate from each other. Until you see that, you have work to do. Less? More? Any further questions in here? Yeah.
Isaac Bowing.
Go ahead, Isaac.
What is danger on the spiritual path? Bowing.
That's used in different ways. So maybe I should ask you what it is you want to know. I understand the question, but that response could show up in so many different ways. It seems, could you fine tune it a little bit for me?
Could try. I guess just reading, cutting through spiritual materialism. The word dangerous occurs sometimes. And I guess it's just kind of scary for me.
He's trying to scare you. So I know it scares me.
So I guess, how can I recognize a dangerous situation on the path?
So what that brings me into is inventing stuff and making up things. So I would stick with that you're even able to ask that question tells me that you're really not in danger. The danger is actually misunderstanding what the path is and thinking that it's this kind of story or that kind of story. It's a misunderstanding of the teacher and the teaching and the community. And I don't think you're in any danger of that right now. But the feeling that you have that feels dangerous, that's just ego. The people who aren't even anywhere near this kind of understanding, this kind of path, are not feeling in danger. They're full of aggression, passion, aggression, and ignorance, and they're fighting with the world around them and creating chaos for everybody under the guise of being patriots or whatever the hell else they invent. But you're not having that difficulty. It can be scary. Certainly has been scary for me. Further questions? Yeah.
When you're bowing,
Yes.
what is scary about it? What's been scary for you?
Early on, it was very, very frightening because I was afraid of finding out who I really am. Because my mind stream is so full of violence and so full of self, shall we say, disapproval or hatred. Then I've mentioned this before. I felt like I was not valuable enough to continue to live, so I was fearful that I was going to end my life. Not planning it, but just by turning into a bridge abutment. End. And that was coming out of just being crazy, just being at war with myself and at war with other people. And that was going on until I met my teacher. Then it didn't go away right away, but at least I had a way of working with it. And I had someone that would encourage me to practice and kept telling me that I could do this. Yes.
Earlier you said your mind is that and that of your teacher are no longer separate.
Yes.
How did that happen with you and Chogyam?
Well, way after he was dead. But it's not like when you say the mind of the teacher, the mind of the student are no longer separate. The way the ego mind thinks about that is that they're the same. that they somehow come together and, or you suddenly are imbued with all the wonderful qualities of your teacher or something. It's more difficult to understand conceptually because if you want the direct pointing at that, I can give it to you, which is His Holiness the 16th Karmapa said when he was passing away in 1981, nothing happens. It's more like nothing occurs. So when nothing occurs, then there's just this. And what is this? The mind of the guru, mind of the teacher. More.
So did that happen at the point of
Wasn't a point.
seeing not separate?
Wasn't any point. There's no point because it's not an occurrence. There's no point. There's no March the 16th, 2003. There's no point. Those things are sometimes called, in the Japanese tradition, called kensho, or insight into some insight. That's an experience of insight into something. And I've had a few of those, not many, but a few way early on. But this is it is like you wake up one day and realize that there's no boundary anymore. So there's no one anymore. So this doesn't give you, I can't sit here and say I'm no one, or I can't sit here and say I've transcended my ego. I can't make any claims about anything. But if I'm asked to teach, I teach. I teach out of what I see, not out of what I know about. There's a lot of great teachers that teach both ways. So there's no occurrence of that. More.
So is it same thing as saying you don't see any separation, let alone with just your teacher? I mean,
Yeah.
There is no separation, period.
I don't see anybody else. You do. I'm not saying that it makes everything so blurry that we're all one. I'm not talking about that kind of crap. We are not all one. We're not separate, which is amazing. There's all kinds of romantic ways of saying it. Petals on a flower or something like that. It's not really part of something, because that emphasizes the separation. But not via negativa, saying not separate. This is a way of addressing the fundamental position of ego is separated into somebody who's getting somewhere, who has better luck than this person, or does better, has better looks, or better whatever maybe. More.
Should be, how does that occur?
What? Not separate?
I guess so.
Yeah, by looking at the separations and looking at them in a radical way. What shows up is the mind. And the primary separation there is the one who's observing the separation, one who's observing the mind, the one who's observing other, whether it's other as the mind or other as another person across the room. More?
Well, I'm just trying to tie that back to examining your mind.
Well, the examining part is to encourage you or anyone to actually watch the movements of the mind, especially those areas where things are really at a great difficulty and keep reoccurring, is to go in. You could call it some kind of deconstructing. It's not exactly that, because it's not so much the intellect, somewhat the intellect, but it's mainly just going in and looking at the texture, the quality of that, and not doing anything with it, not leaving it, not labeling it, doing nothing with it other than just examine that. And if you're examining it, there's an objectivity that shows up when we use that word. You follow? Yeah. And just so you all know, Ondo was asking the question, suggested the talk title about an hour ago. because I didn't know what to say. How did I do? Okay. Good. Any further questions? So, I don't know, is there anything else I can say, or if there's any other questions about it?
Anybody online? Is there
There's a
anybody
lot of people
online?
online, but they already know, so they're not gonna ask any questions. You,
Isaac Bowing.
go ahead.
You mentioned how at the beginning of the path you were scared of finding out who you were.
Yeah.
Did you find out anything new that you didn't know?
You
Bowing.
mean in the last 50 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. Found out something I didn't know before. You know, that I'm not separate from anything. I'm not separate from the anger that I had when I was 4 years old or 10 years old. I'm not separate from you. I'm not separate from the Buddha. I'm not separate from my teacher. I'm not separate from anything, anywhere. I'm not separate from the worst murderer that's ever lived. Not separate, not separate. Also not the same as. Difficult to say that. I mean, you can say it with concepts. How do you realize that? Look at the separations. Look at what the mind keeps separating and separating. Look at, or as the Buddha did, as far as I know, I wasn't there. The Buddha saw delusion. And he saw it so thoroughly that when the daughters of Mara came and raised hell with him and pointed at him and accused him of not having any proof of anything, he plunged his hand into the dirt and said, the Sparsha Mudra, and said, "This earth is my witness." I don't know what he really said. She said, "Oh, do you know what he said? Weren't you there? Do you speak Pali?" No. Do you know what he said? Can you translate what he said?
Teacher Wang, no, I have no idea.
So I'm probably just inventing the whole thing. Yes. No.
So when we were talking earlier about examining your mind, it seemed like almost like we could make a project of it, of really studying
Yeah.
and breaking down what is actually happening in our minds. Is that
So that's, we're not talking, that's all already been done in Abhidharma and other literature where things have been deconstructed and pulled apart into the 51 this and the 82 that, and different aspects of consciousness. And so that's been done. It's not that you can't, you may need to go back and study that. When I looked into it, it's just confusing. Shoka spent some time on it, and you know, he still needs psychiatric help, right, Shoka? More. Needs more psychiatric help. It's not that it isn't correct or true and important. Of course it is. But it's about realizing your true nature. You might have to do it on your own. Look at your own mind yourself with the support, encouragement of the teacher, the teaching, and the community. So, yes.
about how much of a project did you make that? How intentional?
Make what?
Examining your mind.
Oh, I've never done that. That was your idea. Somewhat. Trying to see what was actually occurring in the mind, rather than when I felt this rage, or when I felt this guilt over being or having negative thoughts that would run through my mind that were just horrible. So I was very concerned about hurting someone, hurting myself. I had a great deal of difficulty with that when I was very young. And when I say very young, I'm talking about in my 20s. That's very young to me. My teens, 20s, and it was difficult because the violence or temper would come out of me just like a shotgun. It was just could not stop it or control it, and had no idea how to work with it. And so More?
I'm thinking of you when you developed the opening the eye mind, when you were so intent on really understanding what it was about
That was,
great art.
yeah,
That was such an intentional examination.
it was.
Did you
Well,
do,
no, go ahead.
did you do the same thing with the mind? Is that the same sort of?
It could have been, I don't recall that. I remember that was so tied into everything that Trungpa Rinpoche was saying. I just studied, I stopped studying everything else. I've been studying in lots of directions and just started studying seminary transcripts and anything he had written or anything he had said. And I would just go over and over and over it. Before we even started studying Cutting Through as a group, I probably read it half a dozen to a dozen times myself. But as far as the opening the eye mind, those early sessions started at the Art Institute of Chicago in the early 60s, trying to understand why a painting like Picasso's works or any other paintings, but that one one specific one, why they were in there. Why I was trying to understand art and design, composition, but what makes that so incredibly special? And I couldn't get anyone to say it. People would describe, one of the docents that go around that tell you when they lived and when this was painted, and this is his blue period, and this is it, and just a bunch of information about it, but no one's telling you what is that? What is that makes that worth millions and millions of dollars? And it's just a group of lines, and especially it's an abstraction. The one I'm thinking in particular that I've actually used, that I actually sat down in front of, was called Portrait of Sylvette David, who was this, I don't know if she was a girlfriend of Pablo Picasso's, but she was posed for him. And I don't know when that was painted, I think early 60s maybe. But amazing painting, but the reason I picked it, there was a bench in front of it. So very pragmatic. I sat down on the bench and just looked at it and developed a way of looking at it that was pretty systematic, because it was 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions. How many dimensions would it be? So it had dimensions to it. So that meant there were different areas of it that I could look at. You can't do that with a mind, or you can, but those are tantric practices that are very, very involved. And but this situation, I would look at the colors and I would look at the center of the painting, and then I developed ways of moving the consciousness around in the painting using, I would say, bring everything into consciousness that is blue, everything into conscious, and then I would stop that, then everything into consciousness that was black. And then that would help me see all of the parts, break it down into the parts to understand why, when all these various parts come together, there was some kind of a presentation that somebody, not me, somebody was saying is a work of art, a work of genius or something. And I don't know how many months I did that, but eventually I began to see I began to see it. So that was the beginning of that. Before then, I was just drawing pictures and things and painting a little bit, but not much. I began to see, and the upside of it is I could see what Matisse was doing. I could see what Bonnard was doing. I could see what Picasso was doing. I could see why those paintings were there. And but I wasn't taught that by anybody there. I only had one art instructor that was worth anything, and all he did is encourage me to see it myself. And I remember his name. It was Onderdonk, Mr. Onderdonk. That's about 60 years ago. So, as I said, the upside is I can see. The downside is I realized that I could not do that. When I say I could not, that's when somebody says, "Well, anybody can do anything." No, they can't. People are very limited as to what they can do. So, and I realized that I probably would not have the natural ability to produce that level of art. I still make art. I think I drew pictures today at some point. I enjoy doing that, but there is no pretension about I'm some kind of a great artist. And that was disappointing. But it was also, it's disappointing. I kept drawing and being disappointed. So maybe that's the attitude it takes, I don't know. But then my idea, you could say my goal or my understanding became more, I need to find out what this is fundamentally. And that was back into reading philosophy and psychology and Buddhism and everything else that I could find. Anything else? No.
Divine, what made you believe that you could do this when you came to the conclusion that you couldn't do the art?
That I could do this?
Mhm.
My teacher. I had to meet him because I didn't know if I was going to be able to do anything after reading Cutting Through and other books on Buddhism. That was the main one, several other ones. But that's the only one that really inspired me. That meeting him and him telling me and me telling him what was happening in my mind stream, which was much more than what I'm telling you here tonight. Very specific what was happening. And that's the only thing he said back to me basically several times. And also being in his presence. His presence was overwhelming, powerful. More. And I didn't even do anything. Yes.
Question from Terry Duperrin. How do you lead and not be anyone?
That's the only way you can really lead. If you are somebody, then you're leading with some kind of a motive to be in power, to be in charge, to win, to have power over people, to get famous, to get money, to get. But if there's nobody there, that's the only way you can truly lead. This is you've all seen the Sokukoji Mudra before? It's closed. Thank you so much.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi shu shi son bu sa moko sa moko ja ho mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.